The author Xavier Herbert had a passionate commitment to the cause of Australian Aborigines, immortalised in his epic work, Poor Fellow My Country, published in 1976.
The most difficult task nowadays is to stop people from trying to make me into some sort of leader, some sort of messiah. People treating me very much the way they treated Tolstoy after he wrote War and Peace.
Xavier Herbert's extraordinary book, Poor Fellow My Country, defies conventional description. Author Nancy Keesing partly summed up its million words in this way. Its massive architecture is barely noticed. Resembling the opera house, it houses many activities at one time. Splendid, humble, mundane. Xavier Herbert died in November 1984 at the age of 83. 8 years earlier, I went to his weatherboard cottage at Redlynch near Cairns to interview him, among other things, about how he organised and carried through such a monumental project. Now, interviewing Xavier Herbert was never easy. He regarded questions as impertinent intrusions into his thought processes, and his answers could, like his books, be lengthy. Often the only chance to direct him back onto the hoped-for theme of the interview was when the tape physically flapped off the end of the reel, forcing a brief pause. I've been told that this interview is one of the few accounts he's given of the writing of Poor Fellow My Country, which was begun in 1964.
Then I came home and said, I'm going to write the book. And at once I packed up and went into the bush, which I've always done. I packed up my Land Rover with everything and went away for, say, a month. I never used to go for less. I used to go and write a chapter into the bush. Now, when I talk about the bush, I mean the real bush. I would go where there was no one. I would travel, say, for 3 or 4 days, 500 miles even, to find a place where there was no one, and camp on water and settle down there, and I'd have enough rations. I always carried enough rations to eke it out for 6 weeks. I wouldn't live on the country. I don't like that. I used to at one time, but I don't like it anymore. So I'd live on canned stuff. And
what would you do? Would you sit at a card table and write longhand, or what would you do?
I would make a proper camp over my Land Rover. I wouldn't move the vehicle at all. To supply electric power at a generator, I would just stick myself in there with Poland's over the top, sleep in a Land Rover. I had a bunk, I'd go to bed at 7:30, thereabouts, or even earlier than that, but I generally used to listen for the evening news. I like to know what was going on in the world. And then I would get up about 1:30 in the morning and come outside, depending on the weather. If it was raining, I'd work inside. I had built myself a desk on the left-hand side of the Land Rover, which is very convenient for doing that. You could use typewriter and everything, and the light outside, say, to keep the insects from coming in. Otherwise, I'd work outside with an acetylene lamp. I'd work like that from all through those dark hours until about 1:30. I'd do about 12 hours on it. And then, because I've always been a muscular person, I would get out and do something in the bush. I would go for a run usually. I'd start off by running, and I'd run a couple of miles somewhere when I'd found a track for myself and explore the country generally. I've helped a great deal with the discovery of those caves up in the Laura district. I've been there in that district for a long time. The old Aboriginal caves. And I'd wander around everywhere looking at the country, and while I'd do it, I had a system of cards, waterproof thing, using a propelling pencil, so it didn't matter how much sweat, and being a hot climate, and as I say, through all seasons. I would then, taking notes as I went along, not thinking about it, but as ideas occurred to me, I'd come home and I'd have my evening meal. I should say I never used to eat a midday meal, so that I could go straight out from work, straight to running, and vigorous walking, such as climbing hills and things like that, and always tremendously vigour I used to put into it. So while I did that, I lulled my mind, and I was subconsciously these things would be popping out. Well, then to bed immediately after the meal, as it got dark, and after I'd heard the news, and then up again in the morning to draft that stuff. See? And I would draft that stuff on writing it. We say the next night, I generally used to do 2 sections. I would type that, and a type draft.
You would write it first?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, there were these notes on the cards. They were simply cards I had cut for me, about 2x3 or something like that fitted in these little plastic containers I had, as I say, to be careful of the sweat, and the propelling pencil. Well, I never used to bother to look at that, or even when I did the manuscript draft, very often I wouldn't look at that either. I would remember the important things. And sometimes it depended. I could only do a small quantity, about 100 words or so, and or 10,000 words. It just depended what I called pieces, and it built up in these pieces. Well, then, after I'd written a chapter, and the chapters are very long, as if ever you come to read, if you've got nothing better to do, I would then come home, back here, from anywhere at all, say the Gulf or up on the Cape York Peninsula. I'd travel, say, 500 miles of sea. I'd come home. I'd stop home for a while, or said this, and only a few days, say about a week, I've said this, that there would quite be for a woman to love you, you don't want to stay home for longer than 3 days. I'll find you something to do. But anyway, I'd give this stuff to my Sadie, who would take it and put it in the bank subsequently, and I'd ration up again after about a week, and away I'd go again. And it would take me about 3 or 4 days to get back on the job and going somewhere, a different place again. And so it went on for 4.5 years until I had drafted the whole book practically. And then, in some sort of despair that I'd never be able to write it, going through a state of despair, occasionally I used to take a holiday by doing a relieving job as a hospital pharmacist. I used to work in hospitals, and I was on the establishment, so-called, as a relieving person for this northern place, and I'd go and work in a hospital for a month. So I'd take a month off. I still went on to work somewhat in the night, but they gave me wonderful spells away. I was able to look back at it, and well, then I had to give that up and get to work properly, and then I came in here and built myself a shed. Well, there was a shed there, but I built it more under one of the coconuts out in the backyard, and of course you can't live with anybody. I couldn't when writing, and I moved in there and did exactly the same thing again. I went right through the book again, but this time it was the same sort of running, same sort of note-taking, same sort of manuscript stuff. But this time, and then there was the typing, but then I typed a third time, and that second time rather, and that was the third writing. That was final, because that as the book went through, so much so I never used to bother to read it. I used to chuck it aside, and unless I forgot somebody's name or something like that, I didn't even bother to correct it. And so for another 4.5 years that was done, living here. And very rarely did I leave it. I never took any holiday from it. Occasionally I'd go around here or somewhere. I'd have a couple of days off, say, reading or doing something like that, or fiddling around. And also my electrical work I used to do in the afternoons when I finished. I used to put in a couple of hours of making things, particularly making things out of old, bombed out pieces of electrical stuff, to take something, even if you didn't know what it was, and find out what it was. And people used to give me stuff, and I got it from the railways here. I'd worked in the railway at one time, and when they changed over to the diesel thing, they had a lot of electrical gear out of the workshops, and they started just throwing it away. They gave it to me, and I used to make odd, mad things. Take the thing behind you, for instance. There was a weird and wonderful thing for stopping noise in the night. This thing used to run all night. Sounds like a railway train. And you see how well worn it is.
It's an old gramophone turntable.
Well, that is on there. It turned up the other way, but it's got a different kind of motor in it. And the idea that nothing could disturb me during my sleep. I'd have that alongside me, running throughout my sleeping time. And even while I was working the day, there was too much noise. You'd hear children, say, dogs or chooks or anything, but this would wipe out the whole of the world, you see.
Can you start it up?
It hasn't been used for a long time. Where's the wire?
There we go.
I'm not guaranteeing. Where is it?
And this circulates round, hitting against the bit of bent metal there.
Yeah, well, there's studs in there and 2 brushes, you see, and that hits that, and because it's the old drum of a gramophone in that steel thing, and it's got that sound which is very lulling sound. You can't hear any other sound for it. You wouldn't hear anything in the night, any diesel trains or trucks or children or dogs. And one would be dreaming one's work in the meantime. But that's just an example of that I'd make all sorts of crazy things.
Did you use that while you were working, actually?
Oh, yes, it's been used tremendously, as you can see it. I used to live outside then, I'm having that new place built for myself, and I brought it in here in case I couldn't sleep. But I do sleep very soundly because I've got nothing to worry me.
Anyway, that was it. You finished it in the shed out the back, the book?
Yes, living in there. I used to come in for breakfast and have breakfast and then go away, and I used to make cups of tea for myself, and then I'd come in and have dinner with my wife, and then listen to the news 7:30 and then go straight out and go to bed again. And so this went on. To give you an example, the last 18 months were spent without one break whatsoever. And except for going out, as I say, and running again. And I ran my knees to pieces, of course. I had to have them replaced recently. So that, well, that's the way it was written. The only way I could write anything, by just giving up everything else for it. And I can't see that happening again. I don't see any reason for it to happen again. Why? What is there for me to do? The most difficult task nowadays is to stop people from trying to make me into some sort of leader, some sort of messiah. People treating me very much the way they treated Tolstoy after he wrote War and Peace. Now, War and Peace actually was what brought the Russian Revolution about. After War and Peace, the old tyranny of Russia could no longer go on. It was stopped by War and Peace. It was written 30 years before the revolution. It took that long to overcome the old regime, and I think something similar will happen with this book. But the thing is that, well, Tolstoy harmed himself, as very many writers do. Even White now tends to pontificate. The people come to him and say, "Master, what should we do?" And there's only one thing you can do, and that's what you had done, was to write the novel, to point the moral. That's your job, and not to be a politician. And I have overcome that. I refuse to. I am not a messiah. I am an ex-novelist.